Welcome to our Life Burst Summer Series. I'm Matt.
And I'm Sarah. We're here on Life Burst. We share real life stories of real life people. And today's story has the best piece of advice that we've ever got in 6 years of Life Burst. Yes, this week here in the studio joining us is the one and only Laurie. Yay! Welcome, Laurie.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today and sharing a burst of your life with us.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Or should I say thanks for being had? No.
Well, we'll find out. Yes.
We'll work it out.
Laurie, thanks so much for coming in to share your story. Take us right back. Where did life start out for you?
Oh, life started out for me in England, right down south in a little place called Wimborne, where I was born. And I didn't stay there very long. It was 1963 when my parents decided to emigrate to Australia. And so even before I can remember much, we were on a boat and we were on the way out here to start a brand new life, as so many families in England did at the time. It was that post-war boom. We were the last of the baby boomers, my generation. And, out they came to start a brand new life and a very adventurous life. And I look back and think, I don't know if I would do that as a parent with 3 children. As it turns out, Mum was also pregnant on the ship and thought she was really seasick, and she was pregnant with twins. So,
Wow.
It was a pretty interesting voyage. There were more babies after they arrived, and I was just number 2, which explains a lot.
Right.
2 out of
7.
Right.
Wow.
My parents were very busy.
Yes.
That's a little friendship group, really. Yeah.
Friendship, that was sometimes part of it, yes. But you always had a buddy. You always had a buddy when you had that many children. And you always had somebody to fight with and argue with. And as a girl, I could be a boy or a girl, depending upon what mood I was in. You know, I could play with the boys, play with my sister, play dolls. It was great. Yeah.
So do you remember anything from the boat trip over besides your mum being really sick?
I actually don't remember anything. I was only very, very little. There's a picture of me, I think I put up with me sitting on a bollard on board ship and eating an apple, but I have no memory of that. My brother learnt to walk on the boat. He was only 18 months old, and when they arrived, he got onto dry land at Port Adelaide, and he was walking like a drunken sailor. Yeah, he had to learn to walk all over again. So apparently all my parents could do was just laugh themselves silly. Good parenting.
Yeah, yeah.
But and we came to Adelaide. Then Dad was a design draftsman, so he ended up working for John Shearer's in Mannum. But they didn't stay too long here because itchy feet, they're born gypsies, my parents, went up to the Darling Downs where Dad ended up designing machinery for Napiers, which was combine harvesters or headers as we called them, tractors and all that.
So did your family come to Australia for that purpose to find work, or were they escaping from something, or what?
Life was an adventure and they just wanted to see the world.
Wow.
It was that simple. Dad was actually working in-flight refuelling. He was one of the pioneering guys that actually developed that in-flight refuelling, aeroplane to aeroplane in the sky. And he had a very, very good job, but itchy feet. So over they came.
Right. So Darling Downs, so quite different to England, quite different to even arriving in Adelaide.
Yes, Adelaide, and I can remember driving up because we drove up there. Dad went up to secure work first because they decided that's where they wanted to live. And I can remember we all went up in the car. Dad came back. He must have flown up there. I was about 4 or 5. And I can remember driving up in the car, and there's all these bushfires in the mountains, and we were driving through them. The windscreen had gone. I don't remember too much. I just remember, because it was such an intense moment, of Mum and Dad with the blanket over the front, all the smoke and everything, and, amazing. And we got up there and, it was great. That's where I started school, in Dalby. I had the opportunity to go through Dalby about 6 years ago, and I couldn't believe the main difference, believe it or not, was it used to be a lot greener. because there was more agriculture up there. Now there's a lot of mining, that fracking. But the thing that I remember most from the Darling Downs is all the trucks. The truck drivers all looked the same. They were all skinny little nut brown guys with a wife and about 500 children, and all the trucks were covered in those green tarpaulins. And whenever they stopped to get something off, you know, the guy was all over it, knots, and they were like he-men, tiny little he-men to us. And it was just a fascinating life. I mean, that's all gone now because that was the 60s. But yeah, my best friend was my brother up there, and when the day he started school was the best day of my childhood.
Right.
We got up to lots of mischief.
Yeah.
But being my parents, they didn't stay there very long. The Snowy Mountains scheme in Cooma beckoned for Dad, and off we went, and we moved down to Cooma in New South Wales in the Snowy Mountains, totally the opposite weather to the Darling Downs, as you can imagine. Yes, and we went down there. We had snow. We had, every possible climate known to man. We had bushfires and heat. And I remember this one time, when you're a kid, you think snow, it's all romantic. And English snow, even though I don't remember it, I now know what it's like, is soft. Snowy Mountain snow is hard. It's full of ice. And when you throw an ice, you know, a ball at somebody and they cry, you think, oh, what, wuss. Then they throw it at you. You go home with blood on your cheek and a big round mark. It's really, really hard.
Yeah.
I learned that.
The joys of being in a large family.
In a large family, yes.
Yeah.
We had a toboggan.
Right.
Yes, so we used to try and build up the snow when it snowed and whoosh down it, but we were only little. But we had fun.
So good memories of that time.
Absolutely. And the Millard caravan. Every family had the Millard caravan and the 16-footer with the annex. And yes, off we went to move back to Queensland again after that was all done, because Dad decided that he wanted to work in mining, which was Mount Isa Mining, and he was in head office. And, off we went to Brisbane.
So you're saying that you lived in a caravan this whole time?
No, we travelled in the caravan to go. Oh, sorry.
Right.
No, we lived in in Cooma. Sorry, in Cooma. When you worked for the Snowy Mountains Authority, you actually got to rent homes from the association, that you know, the authority, and in this very, very cold climate, they were all weatherboard houses, but they were fascinating. We had. Wait for this. We had a rock out the front of our place that was really big, and we called it the Big Rock.
Right.
We thought that that was the best thing. We had a little paddling pool in front of it in the summer, and we get on the Big Rock and we jump into this paddling pool that was about this height. We thought that we were Olympians when we were doing that.
Fantastic. Oh, that's good. So I moved around a lot.
You did, yes.
How did you cope with moving around as a youngster so much?
Having lots of brothers and sisters and a brother as a best friend really, really helped. But ultimately, in my when I was in my primary school years, it wasn't such a bad thing, Matthew. And we had a lot going on in our lives that was very interesting. For example, when we were in the Snowy Mountains, man was about to step on the moon. There was all these wonderful things happening. So life outside of the house could also be interesting, and you could also live in your own bubble at home. It's only really in the teen years that for me it became tiring, having to start again, to make new friends, to, I think as you said in your thing, reinvent yourself. But how many times do you want to reinvent yourself? That became difficult for me, and believe it or not, I became very, very shy as a result. I know it doesn't seem like it, but I did. I became extremely shy, and I dealt with that by going into the theatre.
Okay.
That was, music and theatre was my escape. I could be anything I wanted, and it was a safe place.
Okay.
So there you go.
There's a whole world to explore there.
There is. That's exactly right. Especially when you start out as Toad of Toad Hall, but that's another story.
Okay, another story. So back in Queensland, where did you go from there?
In Brisbane, my parents decided that I was about 11 by that time. And my parents decided that it was time for us to meet our family in England. And I think, you know, you look back and think of the wonderful things your parents have done for you, how many, you know, the gifts that they've given you. And for me, that was the greatest gift in my life, that they took us back to England for 2 or 3 years, and we got to know where we were from, who our family was, to get to know our grandparents, aunties and uncles. And that was sort of, if you look at stages of life, that was the next stage of my life. And I mean, we lived a wonderful life in Brisbane, especially. We had, you know, the dry-clad 4-foot swimming pool, which was the swimming pool. We had a fantastic lifestyle. We were still very naive and innocent. We did not even know that the Vietnam War was going on, because my parents felt that we didn't need to know about that at that age. There's nothing we could do about it. And we didn't have TV for a while either. So we were kept very, very secluded from any news outside, in the outside world. It was just our microcosms within microcosms, you know, and school was the biggest thing. And, you know, things, the school bus, that was an adventure in itself, taking the bus to school, and especially when the watermelons were in season, and we used to put them under the bus wheels and all hang out and watch them explode, you know, innocent stuff today.
Yeah.
But at the time we did get in trouble for it. Yeah, we had a lot of innocence in our childhood, especially up in Queensland, and I will always be grateful for that. I really will.
This is Life Burst. We're chatting with Laurie, and we will be back right after this. So, Laurie, now you're in England. Tell us what life was like going back there again.
Well, life was actually quite interesting. It was like we'd been excited, and actually, I'll tell you something funny first. We landed, we went by ship for 2 weeks to Singapore, and then we flew from Singapore to Heathrow. Now, I can remember yelling at my mother saying, "Look at the grass, look at the grass, look at the green." We had never seen grass so green, English green grass, and I'm sure every country has that. It's different to Australian green grass, even in Queensland. So, yes, we turned up, and the English weren't used to families that large coming in on planes, and they'd given us a hire car, which was a Morris Minor, and there were 8 of us.
Roof racks?
No roof racks, go figure. So anyway, 64-seater bus was, Mum wouldn't move until the hire car people sorted it, and all they could find was a 64-seater bus. So... yes, the 8 of us turned up in a place called Wimborne in Dorset, which is right down south. It's a very, very old market town. And we turned up in this tiny little street in a 64-seater bus. And my grandmother, they all speak a little bit funny to us down there. And my grandmother says, "Oh, I wondered who it was turning up like that in a big bus," because that's how they speak in Dorset.
Yeah.
And yes, we got to meet all of our grandparents and everything. But the first night we were there, we stayed with my grandmother, who had been widowed 2 years earlier. And then that was Dad's mum. And then Mum and Dad took us out to meet our other grandparents. Now, they'd warned me about our other grandparents, the most wonderful, beautiful souls in the world. And I absolutely adored them. They had said to me, now, Granny Fussell, that was her name, Mum's mum, Fussell, has a hair lip. She warned us. Now, we didn't have a clue what a hair lip meant. We thought she had a moustache. So we turned up there for the first time expecting to see this woman with a full moustache. And you can imagine it, kids, you know. It's sort of like when you see little people and that and you just stare. Well, we're staring at this woman. It's like, there's no hair on her lip. What's going on? My grandfather had a glass eye from when he was a kid. That they were a bit of a mess to look at, but the most beautiful people. Anyway, we got through it, and it soon became clear to us children that Granny Fussell was a little difficult to understand because she had been born with a cleft palate and a hair lip. Anyway, we got through that, and they were just, you know, "Oh, we love you, you know, all of that sort of stuff." They were just rapt. They hadn't seen us, well, some of the kids they'd never seen. So we're driving home in this borrowed car, this first night we'd landed in England, and there's this silence in the car, and there's 6 children in the back, Mum and Dad in the front. And Big Mouth here, because it was burning me. I couldn't help myself. It was dark. I remember it. We're going down the road. Mum and Dad were quiet as, emotional day. And I said, Mummy. Yes. Why does Granny Fussell speak like she's got a sock stuffed in her mouth? Apparently my dad nearly drove off the road because children are so honoured, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right.
And Mum says, like even today, she said, we thought you knew when we warned you that she's difficult to understand. We just thought she had a big moustache. Yeah, that's exactly right. But it really was like moving into an Enid Blyton novel. I kid you not.
Right.
For us who had grown up in just this wonderful land, Australia, to go back to England, to another equally wonderful land, it was not at a very good time because there were all the union strikes and shortages, food shortages as a result in the early 70s. But we didn't see any of that really. We just saw this absolute wonderland. And the pinnacle of this wonderland was my school.
Right.
And I've brought a picture along for that reason. Now, my school was Queen Elizabeth's Grammar School. My dad went there as well. It had become co-educational by the time we went back, but it used to be a boys' school. And when I say Queen Elizabeth's, it was actually built by Margaret Beaufort, who was the mother of Henry VII.
Okay.
That Queen Elizabeth.
Going back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
1497. It was for us where, secondhand furniture in England was antiques in Australia. It was an amazing, amazing life. Now, the English school system was you had infant school, middle school and high school. And for the first time, I was separated from my brother, which was a bit of a wrench. There was a huge culture shock. In Queensland, we wore thongs, T-shirts, pink zinc on our noses and said things like beauty and ping off, and that was about it. In England, girls wore tights, breasts. We hadn't matured that much. They were very mature. They carried baskets on their arms and they listened to Radio 1. This was, even though I was English, the culture shock was absolutely horrendous. It really was. On top of which, I had to go back and learn fractions and physics and 9 years of French and all that sort of stuff, or 7 years of French, before I could actually go up into the level that my IQ said I was at. And so it was really, really hard. So I did what most children of that age did, and I played up. I still got really good marks at school, but I played up. And the first thing we did was break into the dormitories at the top of the school. There was graffiti up there. I kid you not, it was fascinating. There was graffiti that was scrawled by kids in the 19th century, And you know what? They hated teachers back there as well. We had school dinners. It was amazing. When we came back to Australia, because the economy in England was just collapsing, it was the right time to come back. But I think it was also the right time for us as children because we'd done that. We'd met our relations. We knew who our grandparents were. It was time to come back and almost like take up our life as little pommy immigrants again, because that's really what we were. We didn't fit in England, but we loved it. So it was time to come, as we children felt, home. It was really good. And get the thongs back on, the pink zinc back on the nose. And so we headed, I can remember counting down, it was 23 weeks, then it was 16 weeks, and then it was 11 weeks to go before we flew back to Australia. Bullying was a huge part of my life at that point. Right. I didn't fit in.
And what age were you at this point?
I got back late, nearly 12 years old, and came back 14 or 15.
Okay.
And that's why I got into theatre and drama at school, because that's where, because I was good at it, there was no bullying. I felt comfortable. I also played the flute in the orchestra. I felt good there. It was a good escape. And I understand why I was bullied. It wasn't right, but anything different at that age, if people didn't understand it, they attacked it.
It's cruel, yes.
And it is just part of life. It's like nature when you see those African wildlife things. It's not much difference with kids.
No.
This is Life First with Sarah and Matt, and we'll be back to talk of Laurie soon.
On Life Burst, we are chatting to Laurie. And Laurie, you returned to Australia after a stint in England.
Yes.
How was that experience coming back to this land?
Well, that's the thing. We didn't come back to Queensland. We came back to South Australia where we began because, and that was to do with the weather. And Mum really did feel the heat and humidity in Queensland. So we came back to South Australia, which we knew. Once again, because I'd come back from England, I came back and there was another culture shock, and that was South Australia. Totally different world to Queensland. Because we'd been living in Joe Bjelke-Petersen's sort of, paradise up there. This South Australia was, it's a state all of its own, as you know. I mean, I love it. This is, where I belong in terms of living as an adult. But it was a very difficult transition, from another country. On top of that, it came to us, and I'm trying to talk only about the positive things in my life, but there was, we went to Croydon my parents rented a house while the house in England sold, and they bought over here, and went to a school that had been a technical school until a year before. Now, I'd come from learning languages and, all of the arts and all that sort of thing, doing drama and everything, and this was a school still in transition. And this was a school also where most of the children were either, they had a long ancestry of being Australian, but really Aussie, or they were the children of Greeks and Italians in that area. So there was totally unbelievable. At Cooma in the Snowy Mountains, we were from everywhere, but there wasn't one particular dominant culture. Whereas at Croydon, there was a dominant Mediterranean culture. And unfortunately, women at that point, girls, they weren't treated very nicely by those boys. I'm sorry to say, but it's true. Right. And I had a very bad experience there. And I was so pleased when my parents finally bought a house and we moved. Elvis died while I was there too, honestly. Have you ever seen 800 Italian and Greek boys crying their eyes out saying, the king is dead? It was sort of cute. They thought I was weird because I was a pom, and I'm allowed to say, because I was pom. But they were massive Elvis fans. I never realised how popular he'd been with the Mediterraneans until he died. They were literally boys, and boys never cried back in the 70s. They were literally crying. I thought something bad had happened, but it was Elvis dying. I didn't know.
Some people might say that was bad.
Well, it was bad to them.
Yeah,
it was bad. But for those boys and girls, I was a total alien, I guess, to them because I wasn't Australian, but I wasn't one of them. And yes, it was very, very difficult. But anyway, onward and upward, drama came back in my life as I went to this new school. Okay. And it was out at Elizabeth. So there were lots and lots of immigrant kids there from all walks of life. And as a result, it was the first time I could actually slot in, and it was really good. The bullying was something you could avoid by going, you joined the orchestra because I played the flute. I joined, they had shows, like at the end of the year you did Pygmalion, that was the one. I got the lead role in Pygmalion. Okay. I just sort of walked in and got it because I had an English accent at the time.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I just walked in, got it, did it, done. I had no idea that the girl that thought she was going to get the part would then hate me for the rest of her life because I didn't know about that sort of stuff. I was so naive. I really was naive, too naive. But that, that's life. And then a friend of mine, as I was learning music theory with her father, and I just sat my grade 3 music exams, and he played in the orchestra. He played the double bass in the orchestra for a theatre company in Elizabeth called Nimbus. And she said, do you want to be in a show? Well, that was it. I was hooked from that moment on. Mm-hmm. The show was called Brigadoon. They went on to do The King and I as well. We even toured, which meant we got on a bus and went up to Moonta or something. But for me, at 16, and I thought I'd arrived. I also thought I'd arrived because I fell in love with my first boyfriend. Uh-huh. His name was Clive. He was Anglo-Indian. And he was just so devastatingly handsome as far as I was concerned. I was very innocent and naive. And we went to a school ball. And I didn't go with him. I met him there because I still wasn't allowed to actually date. I borrowed a dress from my sister, Farrah Fawcett hairstyle, and a dress. I mean, even more skirts. And turned up at this ball, and because I was so naive and innocent and childish and been bullied by this nasty girl my friend had brought along, I can't believe this. We're in our ball gowns.
Yeah.
And this mean girl, because, well, you've seen the movie Mean Girls, haven't you? Yeah, there was always one. And she was the one that didn't particularly like me and made my life hell. And my friend Paula didn't like that. So she said, I brought something for us to use. And I said, what is it? I can't believe we did this. Here, she said, I bought it from the joke shop and it was called Disappearing Ink.
Yeah.
Yep, I did it. She came up, she said some nasty things to me about not having breasts, that's something like that, and, get a life and you're useless, all that sort of stuff. And she was wearing this lovely, huge creation.
You got her back.
I can't believe I did it. I mean, my friend told me it was disappearing ink. I hadn't tested it. For all I knew, I was throwing permanent ink. She was with her mother. I was throwing permanent ink on a taffeta ball gown.
Wow.
And there's that moment in life when you know you've crossed the line. I crossed the line. And my friend is like, and I'm like, oh. And I didn't know what to do. And I realised this dawning horror. The stain wasn't going to start with. And her mother was just freaking out. She was freaking out. There were tears. They were sitting down, friends patting her. There was, the looks of death at me and my friend like, you are evil. I'm surprised I didn't get out the wolfbane and the garlic. And then it started to disappear and everything was fine. I can't believe I did that. I mean, you look back with horror, that's what I did.
Yeah.
But anyway...
So no repercussions because it disappeared?
Well, no, because they never spoke to us anyway unless they were picking on us. So there were no repercussions.
There you go.
But I joined this theatre company.
Oh,
you're not wrong. I did. Next time, test it first. No, next time there were itching powder, but that's another story. But went on to get involved in theatre on a more professional level. And didn't look back. It was my escape. It was absolutely wonderful. Went through the normal teenage trials, which we all do, that awkward time. First kiss, all of that sort of stuff. Left school, thought I could do it all by myself. And this was a time when, back in the day, I would have gone to uni if it was today with HECS and all that. But girls, there's a lot you couldn't do. You had to be 21. Before you couldn't be a nurse till you were 21, you couldn't be a police officer till you were 21. I wanted to be an actress. I didn't have a clue what to do. I could be anything I wanted according to, school, but they never really showed you how to go about that. And there were no programs for youth like Car Clue, so I just went and got a job because that's what you do. And so you do your uni as life. Ultimately... I was destined to leave Adelaide, but I went into the public service. I worked for Bridal World. I learnt how to make wedding gowns. It was always something creative to do. What else did I do? Well, mainly the public servants. I learnt how to drink alcohol in the public service. It was culture all of its own. I paid the price for that by getting drunk on 2 drinks, one lunchtime. Luckily, I had good co-workers who realised they shouldn't have done that to me, and they looked after me. I ended up working down at the Lighthouse Depot for Department of Shipping and Transport. So we looked after all the lighthouses throughout Australia, and also all of the merchant navy people. It was a very interesting life. I've done some stupid things because I was very naive, but I survived.
Wow.
So, and that was pretty much my life in Adelaide. Then one night I met a young fellow who was in the Navy, and I decided I was going to join the Navy because I wanted to be in the band and change the world because they didn't have women in the band. That was my whole, Pankhurst thing.
I want to stop. I want to stop right here.
Yes.
And we'll come back because that's a really good... This is Life Burst. This is Sarah and Matt chatting with Laurie. So, Laurie, you met a boy and you wanted to join the Navy band.
Yes, I decided to join the Navy probably about 3 or 4 months before I met him. And I just happened to meet him at the time while I was waiting for my call-up because I passed all the things. Now, I had this grand plan. The grand plan was that they didn't have women in the Navy band. I wanted to join the Navy band because I was a musician. I was a flautist, blah, blah, blah. So I was going to join the Navy and change it. Mm-hmm. That doesn't work. But then in my naivety, I thought that would work. So as time was going on, we sort of hooked up and decided that we'd make a life together. So I left Adelaide yet again and basically became a Navy wife. But before we got married, the Navy said, we're ready for you now. And I'd learned so much about the Navy, I didn't want to join anymore. So anyway, there was a little contretemps, a little argument. And yes, I got I got my own way and I didn't get dragged in by the naval police, the ones that knocked on the door.
Yeah, right.
So I had life as a Navy wife, which is any women who have been the wives of those in service for their country know that it's a different world. It's a far different world back then, especially the Navy, because they were away for long periods of time. But they weren't fighting because there was nothing to fight. There were no disasters to help with, really. So basically, the Navy at that point in time, and anybody who was in the Navy at that point in time will agree with me, it was a round of tattoos and drinking in ports. It really was. There wasn't the culture that there is today. And it was a rough man's world. And then these guys had come home and, of course, they'd been used to drinking copious amounts and getting in fights and all that sort of thing. Ultimately, that marriage didn't work. But it was not so much... it's because of the naval culture. But I have no regrets whatsoever about the negatives as well as the positives in that marriage, because out of that came my wonderful little miracle baby that I wasn't supposed to be able to have. And that boy, that little tiny human life form, was the making of me. I can honestly say, hand on heart, thank you, God. He's a gift from God. That's how I believe my son is. He was the beginning of me finally focusing and giving of myself to somebody, sacrificing almost myself for somebody else, the first time in my life. And I'd never even really planned to have children. So God had other plans for me. That's the way I see it. And Alistair, who's now 33, was part of that plan, I'm sure of it. Just a beautiful, beautiful soul. And mind you, the most horrible child for the first 7 years of his life, but a wonderful teenager, a wonderful young man. Just, my love for him still grows. And and he's a man's man. But beautiful Alistair. And he'd hate me saying beautiful, but he is. So I had him, and obviously because of the Navy and all of that sort of stuff, the marriage didn't work. But as I said, no regrets. And I made that choice just as much as the other party did. And I became a funeral director's secretary instead. This is before I had Alistair. I joined the funeral game when there were no women as funeral directors. By the time I left Sydney and the marriage had broken down and went back to Adelaide, I'd had no idea what I wanted to be apart from a mother. That was it. I was a single mother by that stage. But I came back with a plan, and once again, plan didn't work because life, what did John Lennon, the only smart thing I thought John Lennon ever said, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And, I came back to Adelaide, and before I knew it, I was an administrator in a childcare centre. And then they had Alistair was 3 or 4 because I worked in the childcare centre so I could still be near my son during the day. And I had to work, I had to work. I couldn't live on a pension. And then they had a fate, not a fate worse than death, an actual fate. Right. And Anyway, long story short, I decided to sing a few songs for the kids. The next thing you know, the boss at the childcare centre said, "Why are you doing this working for me when you could be out there like the Wiggles?"
Oh.
So the next
like
thing,
the Wiggles.
yeah, like the Wiggles. The next thing you know, a musician friend and I started a children's theatre company called Morton and Miss Dell. I was Miss Dell Muddle, and we used to go around South Australian primary schools touring, teaching protective behaviours principles, you know, stranger danger and all that. Ultimately, that that had a lifespan, so that had to finish. So my son by that stage was actually in school, and he'd had a great life, being going around to, you know, all these schools, and his mum was up there and he was helping. I also started a band called Sweetwater, which was country music, because I wanted to be able to take my son on gigs with me, and country music, it was a far better environment, not pubs, rock and roll and all that.
Yeah, so we've got a copy of the CD.
Yes.
Up on the screen as well, and we do have a copy here as well. You got a fair few tracks on there as well.
One of those tracks I actually wrote with my son on a car journey.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's called Cover Me in Cash. I ended up going back into the funeral industry and became one of the first of women to become funeral directors after the band, and the band was still going, but
What was that like? Just drawing over that, like, but that's actually something pretty big to happen in the industry.
with the women. Yeah, it was. I mean, the term white lady had people had started doing the white lady funerals thing, but it was generally, there was either the white ladies you went to and it was all women, or the other traditional funeral directors were generally all males and the women worked in the office. But when I was breaking into it, women then became funeral directors in the traditional funeral homes, and it was wonderful. I believe as a woman I had a use by date, because people that need consoling for the loss of wives, mothers, children, it's even more intense. It's very difficult, and people tend to rely upon you. Even stillborn children. I think there is a use by date unless you own the company. And I think the hardest thing I was ever asked to do, Sarah, was I'd moved to a new funeral company, was working for them, and the owner of the funeral company came to me one day and said, "Laurie, my best friend's 16-year-old son has committed suicide. I'd like you to be the celebrant at the service." He wanted me to be the minister. It was a really hard call. I did it, but it did take it out of me, and that was around the time I decided I needed to be doing something else. So I got out of that totally and went into, started a prepaid funeral brokerage, which had a short lifespan. The world wasn't ready for it. And then I went into my husband's family company as a marketer, marketing and business development manager. And that's where I learned all my business skills. And then my husband and I ultimately went into our own business and production, factory, building things, loved it. So, yeah, it was a real rocky ride. I managed a not-for-profit association for a while, but, and then ultimately ended up in a chunga through a whole series of things.
Amazing. Well, Laurie, I think you're in a way a Swiss Army knife of I'm just thinking of
you give me your foot and I can take that thing out of your shoe.
Yeah, well, no, for funeral director, children's entertainer, so many things, and we're not through the story yet.
Hey, that's right. This is Life Bursts with Sarah and Matt, and we'll be back.
We are hearing the amazing Swiss Army life story of Laurie. And Laurie, as we get to this life in the present, you mentioned living in a chunga. Tell us just this last recent part of your life, particularly you mentioned a husband.
Yes.
In this last part of your story.
Yes, I had tended to collect husbands, but I got it right. That's the best way I can do it. Peter. I remember the first time I ever met Peter's sister.
Oh, come on. You got to tell us the first time that you met Peter.
Well, we met over a coffin in the funeral industry. It's not very
Really?
romantic. Yeah. It's not very romantic. However, When I
Okay.
first met his sister, she rushed after we'd left. It was 5 minutes. He popped in to pick something up from her. We left and we were going somewhere. And she rushed into her husband's office because they owned a business there. I ended up working for them. And she said, oh, my God, Peter's met his soulmate. So that pretty much summed it all up. We're both mad together. We're actually both from a similar cultural background, 10-pound poms, you know, that sort of stuff. So there's no, I mean, we even had the same food growing up. There's no surprises, which helps, you know, because you don't have that hurdle. Apart from the fact that he's 6'4" and I'm definitely not. He picked me up once and carried me around the room and said, this is what the world looks like. Anyway, we're going around the room and I went, oh my goodness, look at the dust on the top of that.
They put me back.
Yeah, that's right. I don't want to see it.
I have done the same thing, but so my husband picked me up that we can look at it.
Yeah, that's right.
Did he ever come down to your level?
That's exactly, well, no, he'd probably get another clot in his knee if he did, because it's a long way down. And everything is not built for him. Everything is built for average height people. But yes.
Like Matt.
Actually, Matt, you're pretty much spot on average height, aren't you?
I'm happy to be average.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, clothes, everything. You can just walk in and grab something, can't you? But yes, so I have this wonderful husband who is really, truly my soulmate and best friend. I feel very blessed because, you know, could have gone anyway, especially with a person like me, especially if there was disappearing ink involved. So yeah, I that was the funeral industry, and as I said, I got a couple of other jobs, went into other professions, became a marketer, business development manager, did so many things. But way back in England when I was 12, I started to write a book. Well, 40 years later, I still hadn't written it. But I did want to, I'd fallen in love with history in England and I did want to be a historian. So I did a number of things. The first thing is that I went and studied to become a proper local historian. I did that through the University of Oxford. That was when online learning was a part, you know, you actually had podcasts and all that back in 2010. So I got my qualifications from them. So I knew what I was doing, and fantastic. It also made me realise that Australian history was the way to go for me. And then through a series of events that led to my husband and I starting a business, a production facility, we were doing very well. Things went a little pear-shaped because life is like that, and there was a collapse of the home insulation scheme. And we found ourselves with one foot in the air and one on a banana skin down the other side of Strathalbyn, in the middle of floods, watching everything we owned sort of float away, and it wasn't good. So we moved up into the hills. We thought that if we were going to get flooded in Macclesfield, then Adelaide had a bigger problem than us.
Yeah.
And then I had a stroke, and I mean, yada, yada, yada. That was 3 years ago, and we moved to Echunga because it was flat where we were. In that time, I had found solace in writing. I wrote my first book. It was difficult because I didn't really know the rules. And so I picked up a book of my favourite author, Wilbur Smith. That was one of them. I picked up his book and I worked out how he wrote dialogue. I could write. I could always write. I was a good technical writer, but I couldn't write novels. And I went through that. It took me about 3 weeks to finally get the rules of writing dialogue. And I thought, right, I'm ready. And I wrote my first book.
Is that what you brought with you?
No, that's a will kit that I wrote, but we didn't go over that. That's another day. We'll deal with that. I've written now 12 novels, a lot more non-fiction books for a publisher, but that was my solace. And I found that I finally found my mojo, you know. And when I write about children in books, you know, there's my son's in there, my husband's in there, my family's in there, not intentionally, but because overall this Swiss Army knife, thank you. I have a new
You have
label.
a new thing now.
Yes, I do. Over this Swiss Army knife life, I learned a lot about people. I learned a lot about myself, things I didn't like, things I did like. I learned a lot about when to have faith, about people. People will stuff up. good people do bad things, bad people do good things. I learned a lot about that, and that all goes into my writing, because ultimately the human condition is that we're all here for the same reason. We've just got our lives to live, and this all goes in, and I love history, and I imagine how people would be back in the 19th century when they first arrived in Australia, you know, all of that sort of stuff, the gadgets they used in the kitchen, and then the humour, because you'd have to have a sense of humour. So I write now. That's what I do. I also write history, local histories, but I also write novels. And I love doing it. I love being in Echunga. I found a church in Echunga that, well, that's now become my home. Yep. Him, you're responsible.
So far.
But there's a whole community in Echunga, not just the church, but the town as well.
Yeah,
and I love it. You know, I really do. Up the road, there's a mad old woman I adore. Her name's Marge.
She's not old.
No, she's not. But she's mad, and I love your mother. And there's a whole heap of people, and Echunga. I've worked it out. 68% of people in Echunga are originally from England. That's what the ABS tells us.
Interesting.
So it's a whole, and there's all other, cultures as well. And I just think that they're a wonderful bunch of people. But don't move to Echunga. There's no more room.
No, there isn't.
Secret.
There actually really isn't. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Thank you so much for coming in on today's show. We've left a bit of extra time at the end because to ask your piece of advice, because you brought some props and stuff by the looks of it to make it happen. So
yes,
if you had one piece of advice
if
for
I had one piece of advice,
what would it be?
Well, I'm going to move my chair back and project my voice.
You're looking good.
This is the most important piece of advice you will ever see.
Okay.
How to fold a fitted sheet.
Now, the challenge of this is you have to explain it for people who are listening via podcast.
You see these little seams? They have little seams in each of the four corners. What you do is you point a finger in each of the two top corners, holding the sheet
This is
up.
amazing.
You bring your fingers together where the seams meet and you turn it over. Then you move your hand down to the other end, yada, 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 talk amongst yourselves, smoke if you've got them, isn't that the way they do? And you do exactly, I've never done this sitting down, by the way, guys, so it's a little bit more difficult.
She is sitting down. It is a brown fitted sheet for those who are not watching us.
So that, if I had dandruff, you will see it.
But
And then you end up with your arms stretched out. When you're standing up, it's easier, and you've got your finger in each.
I'll hold that one.
Then you yet again bring your fingers together, put them all over, and as I said, this could go terribly wrong, but ultimately what we're now seeing is, if I was standing up, it would be neater, but the sheet is all there.
Good.
Then
Amazing.
you lay it down on a table, which I'm not going to do because I will make everybody cross when this goes over the microphone. And then you actually, on a hard surface, you fold it once, you fold it twice. It normally looks better than this. There is my life advice.
Amazing.
One fitted sheet folded.
Fantastic.
You did not expect that.
No, nobody has ever. No, well done.
No, that was great. So ultimately right now, for those who are not watching us, the fitted sheet looks like it's a properly folded
It's
sheet.
incredible.
And so if you want to confuse someone else who lives in your house and they'll pull it out and they'll be thinking that it's not a fitted sheet.
That's right.
That's a great idea.
And you'll hear the bad language when they open up and go,
why? Now I have to learn how to fold it again.
yes, that's right.
So for those who are listening on radio or audio, you'll need to go and check out the video podcast to see the exact demonstration and to work it. And look, we don't even have time for me to have a go, do we? We'll have to. To see what I've learned.
Good. Next guest you have on, you should surprise them with your fitted sheet folding skills.
This could be our last question.
How do you fold a fitted
Can
sheet?
you show us how to fold a fitted sheet?
There you go.
There you go.
Yes, there you go.
This has been Life Bursts. Thank you, Laurie, for coming in.
This
on
has
the
been
show
a pleasure.
today.
Thanks for having me.
Amazing.
It's been great. You can catch up with us wherever you get your podcasts from, on YouTube or Facebook, as well as we are a video podcast. This has been Life Bursts. I'm Sarah.
I'm Matt. Thanks again for joining us.
Life Bursts is hosted by Matthew Karat and Sarah Freeman, with production by Reese Jarrett and Kay Hoshraw Ozadigan, with additional assistance by Brett Freeman. For more episodes of Life Bursts, go to rawcut.com.au. This is a RawCut production.